Commander Elias Kane crouched on one knee, his hands stained with blue ichor that smelled faintly of iron and ozone. It coated his palms, streaked his uniform, and clung stubbornly beneath his fingernails. He pressed a sterile patch hard against the wound in the abdomen of the alien woman lying before him. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a visible effort that made her shoulders tremble. She was Lyra Vethra, once heir to the Zytheran royal line, now a fugitive. To the galaxy, she was a name uttered with either venom or fear. The Galactic. Concord labeled her a war criminal. Her own people called her a traitor. Some whispered she was cursed. Most didn't whisper at all, they simply avoided her. 2 days earlier, Elias had been given orders to escort her to a Concord tribunal. In theory, it was a transfer for trial. In reality, it was a death sentence dressed up in legal robes. She knew it. He knew it. That knowledge had hung between them in the transport, like a blade suspended by a single thread. But the ambush changed everything. Mercenaries, supposedly, hired for protection, had turned their rifles on them before they'd even left orbit. Elias didn't know whether it was greed, politics, or vengeance driving them, but it didn't matter. The shooting started and survival took priority. He could have left her. He could have saved himself a dozen times over. Instead, he dragged her through fire, past collapsing bulkheads, and into this forgotten shell of a station. Now, crouched in the dust and shadow, Elias worked to keep her alive. His medkit was down to its last 2 patches, and the adrenaline in his veins was slowly giving way to fatigue. Her eyes, deep violet, with an almost imperceptible glint of silver, were fixed on him. There was no gratitude in them, only wariness. Her kind did not believe in unearned kindness. Finally, she spoke, her voice raw and low. "Tell me, why?" He didn't glance up from her wound. "Why what?" Her lips curled faintly, though not in amusement. "Why save me? I am your enemy. Your people hate me. Your government wants me erased." Elias pressed the patch firmly against her side, feeling her flinch beneath his touch. "Because you're not dead weight yet." That earned him a sharp, humorless scoff. Pragmatism, very human. He ignored the jab, focusing instead on making sure the patch sealed properly. Still, he could feel her gaze boring into him. It was the kind of stare that sought answers beneath words, like she wanted to strip the thoughts from his skull and see if they matched his lips. There was a long silence before she spoke again, this time with a voice less sharp, more deliberate. "Tell me why you love me, human." The words landed like a shockwave. Elias froze, his hand stilled on the patch. It was an absurd question, so wildly out of place that it almost made him laugh. They had known each other for less than 48 hours. Most of those hours had been spent running, shooting, or both. And now she was asking the kind of question lovers asked under starlight. Not fugitives in a rotting corridor, but there was no jest in her eyes, no smirk, no challenge. Instead, there was something heavier, something he recognized only because he had seen it in the eyes of war orphans, in soldiers on their last day of service, in people who had gone too long without hearing that they mattered to someone. It wasn't a flirtation. It was a plea. "You really want the answer?" Elias asked quietly. Her gaze didn't waver. Yes. Somewhere above, metal groaned under shifting weight, a reminder that the mercenaries might still be close. Smoke drifted lazily through a distant corridor, curling toward the fractured skylight. But in that moment, the danger receded. The station, the war, the orders from his superiors, they all became background noise. For the first time since meeting her, Elias let himself stop. Moving, stop calculating, and simply look at her. "All right," he said at last. "You asked. I'll tell you." The makeshift bandage around her abdomen was holding. But only barely. Her eyes were still locked on him, steady, unblinking, as if she were measuring every breath he took. She hadn't repeated the question, but it still lingered between them. Stubborn and unyielding, Elias finally spoke. "You asked why I love you," he began, his voice low but carrying enough weight to cut through the stillness. "So here's my first reason: you fight like hell for your life, even when you think it's already over." Lyra's brows drew together, a faint furrow appearing between them. "That is not love, human. That is admiration for a weapon." He shook his head slowly. "No, a weapon only works when someone wields it. He gestured at her, at the way she sat despite the pain. "You don't need anyone to wield you. You survive because you decide to survive. That's different." She made a faint sound, somewhere between a scoff and a bitter laugh. "You think that is worth loving?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I've seen soldiers lay down and quit because their odds dropped below 50-50. I've seen commanders order retreats before the enemy even took the field. And I've seen good people better than me give up because it was easier than pushing through." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on her. "But you? You've been hunted for years. You've been betrayed by your own. Stripped of your titles, your home, your so-called allies. Any normal person would have stopped running. But you," he tapped his chest, "you still fight for every damn breath. That's not the instinct of a killer. That's the will of someone who refuses to die unloved." Her expression flickered, subtle, but enough for him to notice. She quickly looked away, staring at the floor instead. "Love is not something I've ever been offered without a price," she murmured. Elias gave a faint, lopsided smirk. "Then maybe it's about time you got it free of charge." Her head snapped back toward him, violet eyes narrowing. "You talk as though you've already decided what I am to you. Do all humans think like this?" "Most don't," he admitted. "Most humans are practical. We count risks, weigh odds, walk away when it's safer. But we're also cursed, I guess. Cursed to see people where others only see enemies. To look for meaning in places where there's nothing but survival." Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. "You make it sound like a weakness." "Maybe it is," he said. "But it's why. I'm not walking away from you. It's why I don't care if the Concord calls me a traitor or your people call me a fool. I've made my choice." Her lips pressed together in a tight line. "You are strange, human." Elias gave a quiet chuckle. "You have no idea." For a moment, the space between them was filled only with the distant groan of the stations. Failing structure. The danger hadn't gone anywhere. They could both hear the faint metallic clink of boots in the distance. But the conversation had built its own kind of shelter. Lyra finally broke the silence again, her tone softer now. "In my world, love is transactional. An alliance, a bargain, an oath sworn for mutual gain. No one says it simply because it is true. Your words," she hesitated, "confuse me." "Good," Elias said with a faint smile. "Means I'm doing something right." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, and for the first time, there was no suspicion in them, only something cautious, almost curious. She didn't thank him. That wasn't her way. But he saw it anyway, unspoken in the slight loosening of her posture. Somewhere far down the corridor, a sharp clang echoed, a dropped weapon or a careless step. Elias's hand tightened around his rifle, but his gaze never left her. By fallen support beams and the occasional flicker of failing lights painting the walls in a sickly yellow glow. Dust drifted in the stale air like ash. Somewhere in the distance, metal boots rang against the deck, mercenaries still on there. Trailed out, Elias moved in front, rifle at the ready, scanning each junction before motioning Lyra forward. She followed, her step steady despite the wound. Every now and then her violet eyes flicked toward his back, As if she were still puzzling over his earlier words, they reached a T-junction, the faint hum of an old life support generator vibrating through the floor beneath their boots. Ilias paused, checking his wrist display for a route to the pod bay. Before he could move again, Lyra's voice cut through the silence. "You said first reason?" He glanced over his shoulder. "Yeah." She stepped closer, studying him with that same steady gaze. "Is there a second?" Elias adjusted the sling of his rifle. "Yeah." Her tone was sharp, almost demanding. "Then tell me." For a moment, he didn't answer. The distant echoes of their pursuers seemed louder in the pause. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You speak truth even when it hurts." Lyra blinked, as if the answer was stranger than anything else he'd said. "That is foolish. Truth is dangerous. It gets you killed faster." "Probably," he agreed, finally meeting her eyes. "But I've been watching you since we left. That transport. You could have lied 100 times by now about who ambushed us, about the wounds you've taken, about what you really think of me. But you didn't. You tell the truth, even when it paints a target on your back." Her expression shifted slightly, not softening exactly, but turning thoughtful. "Others have called it arrogance, defiance, recklessness." Elias smirked faintly. "All the things I like." Her eyes narrowed at him, but there was no heat in it. "You're insane." "Most likely," he said without missing a beat. "But love isn't about finding someone who's perfect. It's about finding someone whose flaws feel like truth." "And your so-called flaws?" He gave a short nod. "They're honest. You don't pretend to be anything you're not." Lyra exhaled through her nose, almost like a laugh she didn't want to admit to. "You would romanticize stubbornness." "Damn right," Elias replied. "Stubborn people don't quit on the ones they care about." They resumed moving, but the air between them felt different. Not warm, she wasn't the type to melt into comfort, but lighter somehow, as though the weight of suspicion had shifted slightly. A sharp creak from above made them both pause. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Elias raised his rifle toward the upper catwalks, scanning for movement. When nothing appeared, he gestured for her to keep going. They passed through a section where the floor panels had warped and buckled, forcing them to step carefully to avoid plunging into the level below. The smell here was Worstale hair, mixed with rust and something faintly organic, like mold growing on forgotten cargo. Lyra broke the silence again, her voice quieter this time. "In my people's court, truth is currency. Lies can be traded. Truth cannot. That is why it is dangerous. Once spoken, it belongs to everyone who hears it. You cannot take it back." Elias glanced at her. "And yet you speak it anyway." "Yes," she said simply. "Then that's the second reason," he replied. "Because it means when you speak to me, I know you mean it. You're not playing some game. You're not calculating an advantage. You're just telling me what's real." She didn't respond right away, but her eyes lingered on him for several long seconds before returning to the path ahead. They turned another corner, and the faint glow of the escape pod bay's entry lights flickered in the distance. For the first time, the end of their run felt close. "You have a strange way of giving reasons," Lyra said at last. "That's because they're not reasons for anyone else," Elias replied. "They're mine. You wanted to know why I love you, and this is what you get: no polished speeches, no rehearsed lines. Just the truth, ugly or not." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something less guarded than before. "Perhaps truth is not always dangerous." Ilias chuckled under his breath. "Careful. That almost sounded like agreement." The sound of boots clanging against metal grew louder again, pulling them both back into focus. Ilias tightened his grip on his rifle, motioning her toward the pod bay. "That's 2 reasons," he said. "If we make it out of here, maybe you'll get the third." Lyra's voice was almost a whisper, but he caught it as they moved. "I think I want to." The glow from the escape pod bay shimmered faintly through the dust-heavy air ahead, a sliver of hope in the decaying labyrinth. But that hope was guarded. 3 silhouettes stood in front of the bay doors, Concord mercenaries, fully armored, their rifles ready. Elias spotted them from the shadows of the corridor, pulling Lyra back with a hand on her arm. "They're between us and the pods," he whispered. "We'll have to move fast." Lyra's gaze swept the hallway, calculating distances and angles even in her weakened state. 3 armed, trained, and expecting trouble. In your language. "Not good odds," Elias smirked faintly. "Yeah, but good enough." They crept forward until they were just beyond the mercenaries' line of sight. Elias raised his rifle, lined up his shot, and fired. The first mercenary dropped before he had time to register the danger, armor sparking from the impact. The second spun, shouting a warning, but Elias's second shot punched through his visor. The third didn't go down. He lunged forward, dropping his rifle mid-run and tackling Elias before the human could fire again. The impact slammed them both into the wall with a bone-jarring thud. Elias's weapon clattered to the floor, and suddenly the fight was raw close. Quarters, all fists, elbows, and desperation. The mercenary was bigger, stronger, and wearing full armor. His gaunted fist crashed into Elias's ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. Elias countered with a headbutt that rattled both their skulls, but it barely slowed the man. Lyra staggered toward them, still clutching her side. She had no weapon, nothing, but her bare hands and the stubborn fire that refused to go out. The mercenary shoved Elias back, raising a combat knife for the killing blow. Lyra moved without hesitation. She stepped in, her elbow slamming into the mercenary's helmet with a sharp crack. The blow didn't drop him, but it made him turn just enough for Elias to grab the knife arm and twist. The blade clanged to the floor. Elias followed it with a brutal strike to the mercenary's throat, sending him collapsing to the deck. For a long second, the only sound in the bay was Elias's breathing deep, heavy, adrenaline-laced. He looked at Lyra. Her chest was heaving, her eyes fierce despite the pain. "That's the third reason," he said, voice still rough from the fight. Lyra blinked. "What?" "You don't stand aside," Elias told her. "You could have stayed back. Let me handle it. Saved your strength. But you didn't. You stepped in hurt, unarmed, bleeding, and gave me the opening I needed. You don't wait to be rescued." She tilted her head, her tone flat but with an undertone he recognized as genuine curiosity. "And that is love to you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Because I fought alongside people who would have let me die if it meant saving themselves. I fought beside those who calculated the risk and decided I wasn't worth it. But you," he gestured to the still falling dust in the air, "you didn't think about the odds. You just moved." Her lips pressed together, as though she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. "You fight for yourself," he continued, "but when it counts, you fight for the person next to you too. That's rare. And it's something I can't help but love." The escape pod's entry lights flickered again, urging them forward. Elias picked up his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder, and extended a hand toward her. Lyra hesitated for only a second before taking it. His grip was firm, steady, guiding her toward the pod. As the doors hissed open, she spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "You speak these reasons as if they are uncheckable truths." "They are," Elias said, helping her into the seat. "And I'm not done yet." She settled into the pod, her posture rigid but her eyes on him. "You have given 3 reasons already. Is there more?" He strapped himself in opposite her. "Yeah, but the rest? Those might take longer to explain." The pod's engines hummed to life, vibrating through the metal floor. Outside the viewport, The station's corridors became a blur as the launch sequence began. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You are either the most dangerous kind of fool or the most dangerous kind of man. Elias gave a faint grin. Why not both? The escape pod shuddered as it tore free from the station's docking clamps. Outside the viewport, Virith III's twin suns blazed on the horizon, casting gold and crimson light across the planet's cloud-streaked surface. The hum of the pods' engines filled the silence between them, a low, steady thrum like the heartbeat of a ship that knew it was carrying precious cargo. Elias sat strapped into the crash seat opposite Lyra, his rifle resting against his leg. The adrenaline of the fight still lingered, but in the cramped safety of the pod, it began to ebb, leaving the kind of tiredness that sank into the bones. Lyra sat across from him, posture straight despite the wound. Her violet eyes studied him not with suspicion now, but with something heavier, contemplation, as if she were replaying every moment of the last 48 hours in her mind. For several long minutes, neither spoke. The only sounds were the engine's hum, the faint hiss of the air recyclers, and the occasional creak of the pod adjusting to the vacuum. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. You have given me 3 reasons, she said. Her voice was quieter then. He'd heard it before, stripped of the sharp edges she so often used as armor. 3 times you have risked your life for me. Not for a cause, not for duty, not for gain. Elias nodded slightly. Yeah, her gaze didn't leave his face. Tell me, do you believe those reasons make me worthy of what you call love? Yes, he said without hesitation. Something in her expression shifted, though she hid it. Quickly, she looked down at her hands, fingers curling against the metal armrest. I do not know if I can love you back, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. Elias leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. That's fine. Her eyes snapped back to his. It is? Yeah, he said. Because love real. Love, it's not a trade. It's not a contract. I don't need you to match what I feel. I just need you to know it's there. That someone, somewhere in this galaxy, sees you as more than the names they've thrown at you. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked away, toward the viewport, where the stars stretched into streaks as the pods faster than light. Drive engaged. I have been called many things, she said at last. Monster, traitor, curse. Even to my own people, I was a political tool, something to be used, then discarded. Her gaze returned to him, sharp and searching. You are the first to call me something else. Elias gave a small smile. Not the triumphant kind, but the quiet one of a man who'd gotten exactly where he wanted to be. Yeah, I called you mine. The silence that followed was different this time. No tension, no suspicion. Just the weight of words that had settled. Between them, too heavy to be brushed aside. Lyra's voice softened even more. When I asked you why you love me, I did not expect an answer. Others have walked away from the question. Some have laughed. Some have lied. She paused, tilting her head slightly. You did neither. I told you, Elias said. Truth matters. A faint curve appeared at the corner of her lips, not quite a smile, but close enough that it made something warm twist in his chest. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes briefly. Perhaps, in time, I will learn what it means to return what you feel. Elias's reply was simple. I'll be here when you do. Outside, the galaxy unfolded in sweeping arcs of light, the pod hurtling toward an uncertain future. Somewhere out there, the Concorde would still be hunting them. Somewhere out there, her enemies would still whisper her name like a curse. But in this small metal shell drifting through the void, Lyra Vethra didn't feel like prey. Her eyes opened again. Locking on him? Tell me, human, if I never say the words you wish to hear, Will you still feel the same? Elias's answer came without pause. Yeah, because I didn't start loving you for what I might get back. I started because of who you are. And for the first time in years, Lyra felt the unfamiliar sting of something in her chest, not pain, not fear, but something dangerously close to hope. She didn't thank him. She didn't touch him. But when she closed her eyes again, she didn't feel the cold weight of solitude pressing in. Elias leaned back, watching her, and thought not for the first time that he'd gladly face every enemy in the galaxy if it meant keeping that look in her eyes. Outside, the stars waited.